Phantom's Hope by Rene 4567. Chapter 6. Chapter 5. Gold Diggers and Other Such Games. Summary. Then he gets looked at like he's insane, and he meets the Bat Sons. No, not the Bat Son. It doesn't go well. Danny Phantom arrived in Gotham and felt relief. Not something one would usually feel when entering a city known for the highest crime rates. He reflects. But he went through his entire trip without a single ghost attacking him, although he was visited by one bunny. Accomplishment achieved. Does becoming flat in the infinite realms here count as being emotionally attacked? The others looked at him like he was insane when he let out a breath of relief to the sight of filth and pollution. Should have been a sign of something. It wasn't. Though his parents noticing his mental state should have been a bigger one. His parents probably wouldn't notice if he replaced himself with a robot. After all, they didn't notice the custody transfer papers hidden in the heirship papers. Then he's just glad he doesn't have to think about Ghost, Flat, or Amity Park until he's 18, or his parents remember to pick him up. Jinx. He hasn't been able to truly feel happy in a while. But if he could, he would have smiled as he left the plane and picked up his luggage. It was as if he was a normal person, minus the ghosts and airships. Then he hadn't felt normal since the accident 2 years ago. Heck, he hasn't even felt normal since he learned that Jazz wasn't his caretaker, his parents were, as she had to explain to him in kindergarten because he drew her as his mother instead of Maddie. Teacher said to draw the person that takes care of him. He did. So there he was at the exit of the station, scanning the crowd, when he noticed the sign that said Daniel Phantom. It was going to be awkward if he had to remind all of them to call him Danny. Bruce has a butler and 4 sons that don't have all the same schedules, whatever that's supposed to mean. He sighed and walked to the man who held the sign. Daniel Phantom, I presume. He said it with a distinctively British accent, which only made the name grit more on his ears. Fled. Danny, please. Daniel brings out some bad memories. You must be Alfred Pennyworth. Indeed. Master Bruce had an emergency at work, so he regrettably couldn't make it. Danny was sure it was regrettable. If pigs fly, not that they can't, because a ghost one probably could. But Danny had yet to see a pig ghost. Maybe if a ghost possessed a pig? Can we go now? Of course, young Master Daniel. Danny's eye twitched at the repeated use of his full name. I'm not the young master of anything, he stated, annoyed. That was still a sore topic, what with Vlad making him his hair mere hours ago, and followed him to the limo, his good mood from earlier completely destroyed, and he kept his bag with him despite the prompting to leave it in the truck. They were silent the entire drive to Wayne Manor. Driving to Wayne Manor was much the same as driving to Flad's. As he watched out the window, they drove out of the city entirely past even the richest houses and best neighborhoods, and took a turn down a road that led them briefly through a forest, and eventually it led to a remote-controlled gate that opened as they entered, and the manor came into view. It wasn't any less extravagant than Flad's, but it felt more homey. At the same time, Danny got the feeling that death lingered here. Since being a ghost, he was rarely wrong, and even when he is wrong, there's usually still something going on but he just doesn't know what immediately. So much for a break, he thought, as the limo slowed to a stop. As the furious get breaks. Let me get the door for you, young Master Daniel, Alfred said, as he unbuckled. No need, he replied coldly. and opened the car door himself to approach the manor doors. Leaving the vehicle, he grimaced. It was easier to ignore when he was in the car, but he felt watched by cameras, and his intense senses picked up an argument occurring behind the manor's doors. You can get the real door, though. The butler glided up to the doors, and just as he was about to open them, the doors came flying open, just avoiding Alfred, as 4 children wrestled out the crashed doorway. Alfred cleared his throat, and they froze, slowly looking up. "Young masters, I arrived with young Master Daniel." The tangled teens looked from Alfred to Danny, and one of them managed to untangle themselves and approached. "Nice to meet you, Daniel. I am Dick, by the way. How was your trip?" He had held up his hand for Danny to shake, but Danny's lips twitched in displeasure. "My name is Danny, not Daniel." "And they are?" "Well, Dan, these—" My eyes widened at the name, and I grit my teeth. "I said my name is Danny," Danny stated tensely, interrupting his reply. Then he was starting to fully realize how unwelcome he was there. First, he was called by a name he disliked, then told that his uncle couldn't even make it, and then his children even called him by that name. Danny knows his parents probably haven't warned them of calling him anything but Danny. Heck, Danny's parents call him Dan. Dan, my man. All the time, ignoring his reaction to the bad name. But Danny didn't care. Danny knew that the reason he was sent here was because his parents were concerned about his well-being, and that meant they knew that he was having a difficult time. "Alfred, would you introduce them?" After calling him Dan, Dick was higher on his shit list than Alfred. "Of course," Alfred gestured to the children that had managed to become untangled. "The second oldest is young Master Jason." The teen with a white stripe in his hair nodded, but otherwise looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Danny got a weird feeling from him, and he reeked of death, different from the manor itself. "Then there is young Master Timothy." The next boy nodded, looking half asleep, as if he hadn't slept in days, and took a device out of his pocket. Danny recognized it as a Wayne Tech iPad. The blueprints displayed on the device were for an up-and-coming water filtration device, though. He grew up around science and blueprints. If he could pay any attention without falling asleep, chemistry would be his best class. "And this is young Master Damien." This one stared up at him as if he was looking down on him. "Alfred, why do we have to have a money-gutting filth here?" Damien asked, as he turned his eyes to Alfred. "Young Master Damien," Alfred replied in a stern tone, and Danny knew the reason he was unwelcome. "I have no need for your money. I'm only here because my parents told me to come, to get away for a bit. Doesn't look like I will be getting away much, though, as unwelcome as I seem to be. Who knows, though, maybe my parents will take me home early." Danny almost laughed at the thought. His parents had not only arranged for him to stay here for the summer, but enrolled him for his sophomore year at Gotham Academy, paid for by Fled, who was only too happy to help Danny after Clockwork had sent him to make sure Fled wouldn't blow up his satellite and thereby launch an asteroid at the Earth when the Justice League were too busy to deal with it. Unknown to Danny, Fled had realized that Danny couldn't reject being his heir if Fled convinced his parents first due to a remark of his. The phone was a test to see if forcing him to accept through his parents would work. Danny accepted it so he could call Jazz in the end, though. Later, the realization set in that he had no one to call except his busy sister and arch-nemesis. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Daniel. Get a cat, Fruit Loop." "Tiff." Damien closed his eyes and turned up his nose. Then he gritted his teeth together. "Where's my room?" Allow me to—" Alfred began, but Danny had barely any patience left after realizing what they thought of his visit. "Just tell me where it is." His cousin tensed up at the irritation in his tone and narrowed his eyes. "Now listen here, you little shit." Jason had started darkly, but Alfred waved his hand lightly at him and spoke. "Very well, young Master Daniel. It must be unhealthy to grit his teeth like that. Your room is on the second floor to the right, and your name is temporarily taped on the door. Take care not to get lost. Dinner is in 3 hours at 6 p.m. Is there anything you want or can't eat? I'm afraid we forgot to ask your parents if you had any allergies." I glanced at him as I started walking inside the manor. "I don't eat turkey, sausages, or toast. I'm allergic to a specific flower, but it's almost extinct, so I doubt you have it, and my parents wouldn't know my allergies if it killed me." They all seemed taken aback at that statement, but Danny ignored them as he headed upstairs. He had promised Jas that he would call her as soon as he arrived at the manor. He hadn't promised Vlad, but the creepy stalker will notice once he's called Jas and call him even if Danny doesn't. Especially since Vlad will want to goad about making Danny his hair. The Fruit Loop.